Hi guys, welcome to Learn with W3 Schools. My name is Dr. Shan and today we're going to start R programming language tutorial using W3 Schools website as a reference. Now R is a programming language and it's a great programming language that is used for statistical analysis, statistical computing, graphical representation, analysis of data, visualizing of data and whatnot. So it's a very technical and very in-demand language, especially nowadays with the advent of AI. This language is becoming more popular nowadays using the main features that it hosts about analyzing the data in various different ways in graphical to table form. So we're going to explore this in this complete tutorial. This is going to be a large basic course where we'll cover all major concepts of R using W3 Schools as a reference. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin and start learning R programming. If you're here for the first time, still haven't subscribed though, please do subscribe. It helps us a lot and it motivates us, gives us some confidence in working more tutorials. Do let me know in the comments if you have heard about R before or if you're already using R for that matter. Okay, so let's begin with R programming language. Now, first of all, let's open up W3 Schools website and head on to the R tutorial page. It is an amazing website. It uses the references very wonderfully well. So we're going to delve into it and cover all major concepts from it. Now, the first thing that you start to see on R programming language is that introduction homepage on W3 Schools website. Now, what they're telling us is that R is a programming language. So for that matter, thank you for telling us. Then R is often used for statistical computing, graphical representation, and analyzing of visual data. That's what its primary main purpose is. But we're going to explore what exactly it can do later on. Okay, so we're going to use this website and we're going to explore all the examples given by W3 Schools, and we will see how they are used to analyze the data and represent the data in various different forms, especially using the graphs as well. So W3 Schools has a very nice tutorials and examples as built in. So we're going to explore those examples, see how examples are working, changing the values, and see how example goes one by one, word by word, topic by topic. Make sense? Perfect. So let's get into the introduction section. Now, what exactly is R programming? Well, R is a programming language used for statistical computing. Okay, and obviously graphical representation of the data. So you do analyze of the data and then you graphically represent it in various different forms. It's most commonly used to analyze and visualize data. That's why it is more amazing, more popular. Wherever you need to analyze and visualize your data, you have to use R programming, and there's nothing more better than that. So that's why the main purpose is, and we try to go and explore all this using these topics given by W3 Schools. Now, why use R as compared to any other languages? Well, there are many prominent reasons for that. First, it has great resources for data analysis, data visualization, data science, and machine learning. So if that doesn't pull you into R programming, well, nothing else will. If you are a data analyst or you're working in machine learning and data science, R is your go-to language because it can do so much things for you very easily and conveniently. It provides statistical techniques such as statistical tests, classifications, clustering, and data reduction. It's easy to draw graphs in R like pie charts, histogram, box plots, scatter plots, etc. using your data. So we have a data and then you can very easily plot various different graphs for your research work, for your analysis, and whatever application you're working on. It works on different platforms like Windows, Mac, Linux. It is an open source and free. That's something that we always love. Any language that is open source and free to use has a huge community as well behind it because, again, it's open source. And then it has many packages and libraries and functions that can be used to solve various different problems. So that's why the key thing is that we use it for our data analysis, and having this, being able to draw various different graphs based on our data, just is wonderful thing. So let's get started and explore the basic syntax of our programming language. Well, first thing is first, how do we install R? So in this example, I will be using W3 Schools built-in R setup, and we're going to explore the R programming using the W3 Schools on website, but you can install it on your PCs as well. So all you need to do is go onto the cloud.rproject.org and download the latest version of R for whatever operating system you're using. When you have downloaded and installed R, you can run it on any computer. That's hopefully as simple and easy as it should be. I will try to post a separate video of how you can integrate R with your VS Code. As you know, most programmers tend to nowadays prefer VS Code. It has many extensions and makes life much more easy. Yes, you can customize R with VS Code as well. We'll talk about that later on. But as I said, primarily we will be using W3 Schools on website. We'll click on R, try it yourself, and it has a basic code, and we can click on it and run it. So if you don't want to install it, don't want to get into the hassle of it, just want to understand how R is working, what it is. So this will be very easy for you without any installation. Just use the W3 Schools own built-in R compiler, and you can run the code very easily. Make sense? Perfect. Let's go into and try and explore the syntax of R now. Okay, well, the R syntax basically means that how we write the R programming. So to output text in R, we use single or double quotations. The first thing to understand is, obviously, if you're coming from any other programming language, this would make sense. So if you need to print something, you just write hello world in inverted quotations and it will print the content in your output. So that's it. So there's no prefix, no code, no functions up till this point. If you are in R, just open up the console, and if I just write simply hello world within inverted quotations, it's going to print here. And obviously it's just printing the line numbers here as well. Okay, make sense? See how easy it becomes to work with R. To output numbers, you just type in the numbers without quotation marks. So if you want to type in 5, 10, 25, just write this in the R interface. In this case, 5, 10, 25 I've written here, and then you will find that it just prints the values here. So 1, 5, 10, 25 based on this thing, outputs gets printed. So no other functions, no main functions, just you can go with that. So congratulations, you have just used your first R programming language. Wonderful, right? So this is how simply you can get started with printing R. But then we have something called a print function in R. Yes. So like other programming languages, we have prints. So unlike many other programming languages, you can output code in R without the print function. So if you just write the strings, you can easily print it. We just shown you. However, R does have a print function available if you want to use it. So this might be useful if you're familiar with other programming languages such as Python or Java, C# or any other languages. Python specifically uses print. If you're coming from Java, we use system.out.println. If you're coming from C++, we use cout. In R, we use print method. So you can use print hello world as well. So instead of just typing in the string, you can use print hello world and it will again output the same thing, print output on the console. But do remember that you can do it without the print function as well. Okay, and there are many times you must use print function to output the code. For example, when you're working with the loops, which you will learn in next sections, you will be required to use the print function. So if you just use the X value here, it will now work fine. Okay, we'll just create some problem. So better to use print function in from start to end, just makes life much more easier, even though knowing that you can do it without it, because at some places print is necessary. So it's up to you whether you want to use print function for the output. However, your code is inside the R expression, inside the curly brackets, like the example above. Use the print function to output the result. Okay. So since the code is inside the brackets, you need to use the print function. So just be careful about that. So that's the first part of the syntax. Let's talk about comments. Well, every programming language has comments. So does R. Like every other language, comments are basically instructions to the compiler that please ignore this line. Okay, this means that do not print or execute this line of code, just comment it out. It's just ignored by the compiler. So comments can be used in R to explain your code, make code more readable, give some explanation, what's happening in the code and whatnot. And to do that, we use the hash sign, same as Python, by the way. So if you're coming from Python, you might be familiar with the hash sign. So when executing the code, R will basically ignore this line. Okay, so whatever precedes after this hash sign will completely be ignored by the browser, by the compiler, sorry. Okay, so when we execute our code, you will notice that anything that you write inside the comment is ignored and only the main statement is actually executed. So this line is completely ignored by the compiler. Okay, so whenever we need to use comments, we use the hash sign. This will just simplify much more things. Obviously, this hash can come in front of the line as well. So you can write in front. So this, up till this point, the code will execute. After this is commented out. Okay, anything that comes after the hash is completely ignored. So whether you write it before a statement, after a statement, in front of a statement, just makes sense. Yes, if you write it first, for example, if you execute this code and see this, so the comment is ignored at this point. But if you execute and you write this line, Control C, if I print it in front of it, now because this line is also coming after the hash sign, so everything after this is ignored. So even though we have a statement here, even though you can write print function here, if you write a print function here, still this line will be ignored, even though we have a standard code here. Why this is ignored? Because again, we have a comment. So anything that comes after hash is actually ignored. So anything after, whether it's after this statement, before or anywhere. Yes, anything if it's before this, before the hash sign, that get printed. But anything after hash, completely ignored. So keep this thing in mind. So this is a simple way of comments. If you need to use multi-line comments, well, again, same as Python, we use multiple time hash. Okay, so you can use hash multiple times to write a detailed comment about some code or some instructions, or just sometimes commenting out certain piece of codes just to test and debug some things. You can use hash as many times as you want. Everything you write inside comments is ignored. Make sense? Wonderful. Let's go on to talk about variables now. Okay, so now variables are basically containers that you use to store the data. Okay, so in R also same thing goes. If you are coming from another programming language, you might be very familiar with it, but if you are coming to R for the first time, do note that we use something called variables, which basically are containers, means they are able to store data values. So we have a data value, we don't use it directly. In fact, we use the containers called variables to store those data values. Okay, so R does not have a command for declaring a variable. A variable is created the moment you first assign a value to it. So to assign a value to a variable, we use this arrow function. So we use an arrow, less than sign and minus, okay, if that's what makes sense. In other words, a reverse arrow sign to assign a variable to a value. To output or print a variable value, you just type in the variable name. So for example, we have this code here. Now what's happening here is that we have a string called John. We are assigning John to this variable called name. Now notice there is no prefix here, means there's no data type specifically specified what type of data it is. It's just a variable name, arrow function, and then a John. We call it an arrow, makes life much more easy, but it's actually less than sign with minus. So makes a reverse left hand side arrow. Okay. So this is what it's doing. Even if you are using an integer number or any other number for that matter, you use a number value, use an arrow function, and then you require a variable name. A variable name can be any name as long as does not have a space or it does not start with a number. That's 2-3 main basic rules that we follow. So you cannot start a variable name with a basically number. Again, we talk about this in variable name section, but do keep this thing in mind though. Okay, so this is how we declare a variable in our programming language. In other programming languages, we typically use equal to sign. Okay, most programming languages do prefer that, but R, it just says, I want to use a different sign. So it uses this reverse arrow symbol, less than, minus, and then we assign a variable. And then in order to print it, you just type in the name and it will print the value John, or you can just print in the age, it prints 40. Remember, we can use this inside the print function as well, or you can just type in the variable name, since we know that print function is not a mandatory in most cases except in some. Okay, now so from the above example, name and age are variables while John and 40 are basically values. So to keep these two terminologies in mind, these are values, this is variable name. This variable name now has this value. So whenever we call the variable name, it will print the value. So this behaves like a container, it holds this particular value. Okay, make sense? Okay, so in other programming languages, it's a common to use this equal to operator, but in R we use this less than sign. Okay, so if you scroll down, print output, again, sorry, just one main statement. However, this line is preferred, but you can use equal operator for that matter as well. Okay, so just keep this thing in mind, but it's preferred that you use this less than most commonly. So that's why most common examples throughout this, we will be using this arrow functions. So now printing output. Okay, how do we print output? So to compare to other programming languages, you do not need to use a function called print or to print out the variable's value. You can just type in the variable name. So since we only declare a variable here, and then in order to print it, you can just type in the name and it will print the value. There we go. So now what we have is we created a variable, we assigned it a value called John Doe, and then we just use this name variable here without any print function or anything. So what this is going to do is it's going to print the output on the console, whatever the value is stored in this variable. Okay, make sense? Yes. Similarly, however, R does have a print function and you can call the name inside the print function as well without the inverted quotations marks. Because if you use inverted quotations, it's now going to think that this is a string and it's going to print this string as it is. Okay, so it's going to print the name. But since we want this to be behaving as a variable, as a container, so no inverted quotation marks, we just write the variable name as it is and then it's going to print the value. Okay, so there are times you must use print function to output the code. For example, when you go using it within the for loop, we just talked about this in a moment, so do keep this thing in mind. So if you are printing the value of x, you must use the print function because it uses the block and it needs to understand what's happening here. Okay, so it's up to you whether you want to use a print function or not, but most preferably its print function is recommended in certain situations. So if you're coming from other programming languages, you might find things much more understanding if you use print function within the R. Better. Let's talk about concatenating elements. Okay, now what do we mean by concatenating elements? By concatenating elements means combining two things together in the output. Okay, so you can concatenate or join two or more elements by using the paste function. Okay, to combine both text and a variable, R uses a comma, and then we combine them together. This is like a concatenating operator that combines two things together. So for example, we have a text, again a variable name, arrow function to assign a value, and the awesome becomes a value itself. So we have a text that contains this value awesome. Then in order to use this with another string, concatenation here is, notice there's no print function here. We use a function called paste. Paste R is a string, comma, text. What this is doing is it's combining this variable's value with this string. Now, if you're coming from other languages like Java or C# or C++ or Python for that matter, we use the same print method to do this operation. In R, it's using a separate function to do this concatenation called paste method. Okay, so when you execute the code, you would see that we use a paste method, and then it takes the string, comma, combines, because this is like a concatenation operator, and it joins it with the text string. So the output is R is awesome. Okay, so R is awesome means R is from string A, and then the comma from awesome word is concatenated as a string B or a value B. Okay, so paste, keep this thing in mind. Whenever you're concatenating, combining two values, you can use the paste method. You can combine two variables as well. So you can use variable 1, comma, variable 2. In this case, text 1, comma, text 2. So it's automatically going to take the content from this one, comma, concatenate it with this value. So it's print R is awesome. So you can concatenate it two or more values using this comma operator. Okay, then you can use the plus as well, but when you use plus, it works as a mathematical operator. So if you have value like 5 and then value like 10, and then you use plus operator, is going to do mathematical calculation and just add these two numbers together. So this becomes our mathematical operators. So if you're trying to combine a string and a text, do keep in mind this is going to generate an error. For example, if I have a num5, which is again a number, and then I concatenate it with or add it with a string. Okay, so this is generating an error because this is of a different type of data. We're going to talk about data types later on, but this means that this is a number and this is a string. I cannot do a technical calculation on these two things together, so we generate an error. Okay, multiple variables. Okay, what do we mean by multiple variables? Well, multiple variables means having multiple variables assigned the same value, okay, or declaring multiple variables on the same line. R allows us to assign same value to the multiple variables within one single line. How do we do that? So for example, we have variable 1, arrow function, variable 2, arrow function, variable 3, arrow function, and the value. So now here actually this is the value. These three are behaving as variable containers. Why we may use this? Sometimes we need to initialize multiple variables with a default value. Okay, so that all variables have initial default 0 value or something of that sort, and then later on we want to use it. So to declare and assign multiple variables same value, we basically can use this. Again, this happens in all programming languages. The only difference is we use arrow functions here. So if you print this function, okay, so if you print this function, you notice that all three variables print exactly the same value. So variable 1, variable 2, variable 3, all are printing orange because the same variable or same data has been assigned to all different variables. Okay, and this is what we mean by assigning multiple variables. Let's talk about a little bit about variable names. What kind of names we can use to the variables? As already mentioned, that variable names basically means that what type of name we can have, and the names should not have spaces. But it's a very common practice to come up with certain other characters within variable names. So knowing some rules or ground fundamentals that what names I can use as a variable or not is quite important to know in your programming. Okay, so yes, variable names are also sometimes referred to as identifiers. Okay, because they identify the value that's being stored there. So do have that thing in your mind. So a variable name can have a short name like X or Y, single character, or more descriptive like age, car name, total volume, etc. Rules for our variable names are quite simple and straightforward. Let's explore them. A variable name must start with a letter and can be a combination of letters, digits, or period. Now, here the key thing is it must start with a letter, meaning that your variable name cannot start with a number. Okay, so it cannot be followed by a digit. So make sure you have that. If it starts with a period, it cannot follow with a digit. So if you use with a dot, you cannot use it with as a number as well. Okay, so here are a few examples with the legal names, but let me just read through these. So a variable name cannot start with a number or underscore, made sense. Again, we have already talked about this. The only difference is if you're coming from Java or if you have studied Java or not. Java does allow underscore naming, so does Python. But according to this rule, a variable name cannot start with a number or an underscore. In R, you cannot start with an underscore. Number, understandable, it's across all programming languages, but underscore is something quite unique for our language. Means that you cannot actually use underscore as to start as a first character in a variable name. Variable names are case sensitive, so age are two different variable names. So if you use age as a small letters with a capital A, these two becomes completely different to each other. Or if all letters are different, all these three are completely different. So do keep this thing in mind. Okay, and then obviously we don't use reserve words as a variable names as well. We will talk about reserve words as we explore them later on. So here are for few legal variable names. You can use my var, you can use my underscore var, you can use my with a capital V, which this is called a camel case, a variable naming where the first word starts with a small, the second word's first letter starts with a capital. So make it more readable. You can have all caps, you can have variable number, we can have a variable starting with alphabets and a number, making sure the number is not the first character. And then you can also start with a dot. Even though if you start with a dot, then again you cannot use a number here. Okay, the rule was quite clear. Illegal names, again, you cannot start with a number, you cannot use minus, you cannot use space, you cannot start with an underscore, you cannot use an @ sign, you cannot use a reserve word like true or false. If some words are reserved, you cannot use them as well. So these are all illegal names, you cannot use them. These are all legal names, you use them. So it's good habit, a good practice to know what kind of variable names you use and what variable names are there that are allowed. Okay, make sense? Perfect. So this concludes today's session. Tomorrow we're going to continue more about data types, numbers, and math operators. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. Tune in to the W3 Schools to follow along our complete tutorial. We're going to explore all these major functions in next sessions as well. This is Dr. Dishan signing off.